Awesome, and we are live. So welcome everybody. My name is Fede Sarkis. I'm working building the Buildathon, organizing the Buildathon for ETH Argentina next week, 16th and 17th of August. And here we have Ian, who's a developer at Worldcoin. Hey Ian, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Worldcoin?
Yeah, so great to see everyone here. I do developer relations at Worldcoin. So when it comes to integrating World ID, our proof of personhood system into an app so that you can know that your users are not bots and that they only have one account, I'm the main point of contact for helping make those integrations happen. Um, so I'm super excited for this workshop today to give everyone an overview on World ID, some information on how to integrate it, and then answer any questions anyone has about Worldcoin, using World ID in their hackathon project, anything like that.
That's awesome. I've been talking with Diego as well, and apparently Worldcoin is a success. Your guys are getting a ton of registrations every day, right? More than expected. So I know there's a lot of noise going around, and we'll know more about Worldcoin with your presentation. So that's awesome. Thank you very much for helping with the Build-a-thon, sponsoring, being here, getting into the Latin market, and helping builders build cool products for real problems. And I think that's the most important thing here is that Worldcoin helps connect with the real world and solve like this complex issue, which is IDs and how to identify a person on chain, right? So without further ado, all yours.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So in this workshop, I'll go over what World ID is, why Worldcoin created it, what you can use World ID for, and how to integrate it into your project. So Worldcoin started out as a project that wanted to give everyone in the world a little bit of cryptocurrency to introduce them to this digital economy. But there's one big problem with that. How do you know who or what is a real and unique person, right? Any of you have ever tried giving anything away on the internet, you know that people are going to spin up multiple accounts to try and claim two or three people's worth. And that's something that we want to try and prevent. This is what World ID helps solve. And World ID recently became publicly available. It's still in beta, but there's no longer a waitlist required. World ID is built to be private, inclusive, and robust. For private, we want to know as little about who you are as possible. We never ask your name, we never ask your email, anything like that. All we want to know is that you are a unique human, but which unique human you are, frankly, isn't something that we're interested in. We want World ID to be inclusive so that as many people in the world as possible can participate in this digital identity system. And we want it to be robust, ensuring that each person only gets one account in this system. And when it comes to how you identify someone as a unique human, there's a bunch of different methods for this that we've looked at. The easiest one is email or phone numbers, but that one's not really robust. I have multiple email accounts, having multiple phone numbers is super easy, so it doesn't work for that requirement. We looked at doing KYC on official government IDs, but that one's not inclusive enough for us because less than half of the global population has a digitally verifiable government ID. We looked at web of trust systems, but they aren't quite scalable enough for us, right? In a web of trust, there's an initial trusted set of individuals, and they attest that other members of the system are real people. But every hop away from that initial trusted set you are in a web of trust makes you a less trusted identity. And it doesn't scale very well at all to all of humanity. So we settled on using biometrics. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do biometrics as well. We looked at fingerprints, palm scans, face scans, but those actually don't have enough entropy to scale to all of humanity either. Face ID or Touch ID on your iPhone can distinguish about 1 in 30 million people. And when you're trying to determine if the person in front of the phone is the same person who was in front of the phone when they set it up, 1 in 30 million works really, really well for that, right? The odds that I'm in the US, the odds that the person who steals my phone is one of roughly 10 people in the US who would be able to unlock my phone is incredibly low. But we're not trying to prove that it's the same person now as it was at sign up. We're trying to prove that this person at sign up is unique from everyone else. So 1 in 30 million there suddenly becomes a huge issue when we're trying to scale to all of humanity. We also looked at DNA. The issue with that is that it's very invasive and it breaks the private component of that. You know a lot about a person based on their DNA, a lot of information that we never want to know about people. So we settled on using iris biometrics, taking a photo of your iris, calculating an iris code, a unique digital representation of that photo of your iris that cannot be reversed back into the image. And we never have to store those photos. And when it comes to how we actually get those photos of the irises, we looked at using your phone. But the issue there is that phone cameras simply aren't high quality enough to get the level of detail that we need to distinguish between people at the scale of humanity. We looked at some off-the-shelf hardware, but again, the quality wasn't quite what we were looking for. And trusting off-the-shelf hardware requires a lot of validation. So we settled on building custom hardware, which is a really big leap from the initial mission of giving everyone in the world a little bit of cryptocurrency for free to introduce them to this digital economy. But it's what we've had to do in order to actually start fulfilling that mission. So the custom hardware we settled on is this device called the Orb. The Orb's been in development since early 2020 and has gone through lots of different revisions. And what the Orb does is first make sure that you're real and that you're a human, right? It can tell that you're a human and not a cat or a dog. It can tell that you're a real human and not an image of a person. It takes photos of each of your irises and calculates this iris code, that representation of the entropy of your iris. And unless you opt in, those photos are never stored. You might choose to opt in so that if we have a significant upgrade to our algorithm in the future, you wouldn't have to be re-verified at an orb. Additionally, we can use those images to help train our algorithms and improve the safety and security of the system. But again, it's entirely optional to have those images stored. And once we've verified that that iris code is unique, we verify your world ID. So this world ID is your self-custodial identity stored on your mobile device. It's somewhat like an internet passport in a sense. And there are multiple different proof of personhood credentials within World ID. Orb biometrics are sort of the gold standard for us. Additionally, you can verify your World ID with a phone number as a much weaker proof of personhood for users who may not be able to go to an orb or for use cases that don't require that strict of this proof of personhood. World ID is privacy first, decentralized, and open source. All of our code, smart contracts, everything like that is on GitHub. And there's so little information that we store about users because we have privacy as such a core tenet. There's lots of different reasons and use cases for World ID, right? For voting, it's super useful to know that each vote is coming from a person who's only able to cast one vote in that system without revealing the identity of that person voting. For social media, you might want to know that your users are real humans and not bots. For airdrops, right? You want to make sure that each person can only claim that airdrop once. Customer incentives are one that I find super interesting because you can give different level discounts based on how strongly you know that that user is a unique human who's only going to be able to do this action once, right? Say if they're orb verified, you give them half off of their first order because you know with really high certainty they're only going to be able to get that discount once. Whereas if they're just phone verified, maybe you give them 10% off. We've also designed World ID to be super easy to integrate into your app, whether it's on web, on mobile, or for on-chain use cases. There's two main ways you can integrate World ID into your app. Sign in with Worldcoin, and anonymous actions. So we'll start with sign in with Worldcoin, and I'll show you a brief demo of that. We actually use sign in with Worldcoin on our developer portal. And this is also a little tutorial on what you'll need in order to build on World ID in this build-a-thon. So on the right here, I have my phone. I have my World ID. I have been orb verified. And I'll go ahead and log into the developer portal here. So for sign in with Worldcoin, it redirects me to this page with a QR code that I have to scan with my phone. From World app, I press this button in the top left, and I scan that QR code. And then it has me verify with World ID. Oh, small issue there. This happens sometimes. If I log in again, it should work this time. Now that I've verified with my World ID, I'm in the developer portal. So in the developer portal here, you'll have to create an app. I can go through staging and production in cloud versus on-chain later, but this developer portal at developer.worldcoin.org is one of the first things you'll need to interact with when starting to develop your app. So to use signing with Worldcoin in your app, there's a bunch of different ways you can actually integrate it. You can use our social login provider with Auth0, a very common identity authentication engine. You can use Next.auth.js if you're using Next.js in your app's front end. If you're familiar with OpenID Connect and have a custom authentication engine, you can use our OIDC well-known file. You can even go so far as to custom implement your OpenID Connect flows. But in this brief tutorial, I'll go over how to use Next.auth.js, and we also have a template repository available for this. So in Next.auth, there is one configuration page that you have to create, and we add a provider for signing in with Worldcoin. With this, we pass this well-known file that includes a lot of the information that Next.auth needs in order to properly configure itself to use World ID for sign-in. The client ID and client secret here, we both get from the developer portal when we create an app. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. So we create an app, let's call it ETH Argentina. And for a staging or production app, for the build-a-thon, you'll typically want to create a staging app. And with that, you'll use the simulator at simulator.worldcoin.org instead of the World app when testing your applications. For sign-in use cases, we also have to select cloud and not on-chain. So let's create this app. And then if we click on the sign-in tab here, we can see our client ID, which is the same as our app ID, just different terminology, and the client secret, right? Because this app isn't going to be used for anything, I'm okay with you seeing what the client secret looks like here. But this value, you should make sure that you don't share anywhere. It isn't accessible in your app's front end. It should just be an environment variable available in your backend. So you would have both of those in your environment variables for your application. And then once it's completed the authentication, it returns the profile sub. This is the unique identifier for a user. With sign in with Worldcoin, this will be different for every different app in order to prevent correlating a user between different apps. But every time a user signs into your app, this will be the same value. And additionally, we get the credential type that will either be orb or phone so that you can know how strong your user's proof of personhood is. Additionally, in the developer portal, you have to set a redirect URI. So for an application using Next.auth, that might be something like https myapp.com/API auth callback Worldcoin. This is specifically the format that Next.auth uses. That may vary if you're using Auth0, but the installation instructions for the Auth0 integration also explain what you should set your redirect URI to. Another thing to note is that the redirect URI cannot be a localhost domain at the moment. So if you're using our next auth template, it's very easy to deploy this to something like Vercel, which will assign a URL that you can then put into your redirect URI to test your sign-in integration. And that's all that it takes to integrate sign-in with Worldcoin. Anonymous actions are a little bit more complex, but a little bit more powerful than sign-in with Worldcoin. Sign-in with Worldcoin is useful for a lot of Web 2 use cases, but if you want to do anything on-chain with World ID, then you'll have to use anonymous actions. So with anonymous actions, you know that your user is a unique human doing something only once or an arbitrary number of times that you can pick. It adds a little bit of complexity, but it's possible. And with a specific signal. So that signal can be any bit of information that you want to include that you want to make sure doesn't get tampered with. So for a voting example, this would be which option a person wants to vote for. Or for claiming an airdrop, this signal would be the wallet address that that user wants to claim this airdrop to. It just ensures that that value can't be manipulated or changed, which is really useful when dealing with things on-chain. So let's see a quick demo of what it's like to use anonymous actions. So here in our developer documentation at docs.worldcoin.org, we have a try it out page. And I'll also demo how to use the simulator here. So in the anonymous action section, I've selected staging, right? And over here, I'm at simulator.worldcoin.org, where we have a bunch of just pre-verified identities you can use for testing. When you want to test things on chain as well, for testnets, you must use the simulator rather than World app. So we have our staging app all set up here, and we click continue with Worldcoin. We get this widget that pops up. I can either scan this QR code with the camera if it's a production use case and I'm using World app, or if I'm running the simulator on my phone, I can scan that QR code with the camera as well. But for testing use cases where you might want to run the simulator on your desktop, like I am here, you can actually just click on the QR code to copy the information. Go here to paste data, manual input. I paste the value in there and click submit. And it acts just as if I had scanned that QR code with my phone. So then it asks me to verify with World ID. In the simulator, you can choose which credentials you want to pass. I generally would recommend sticking with biometrics being enabled. It will return the highest method that this identity is verified with. All identities in the simulator are verified with both, but if you're doing something off-chain and don't want to use the orb verification, you can uncheck that, and this will act as if it's a phone verified user. But here, I required that users be orb verified, so I'll leave that checked. And now, this is what the user sees after World ID verification is successful. So from the user's perspective, using anonymous actions is also super easy as well. But when integrating it into your app, how do we get started with that? And it all starts with ID Kit, which is our front-end widget that you saw there. So it's a single React component that you have to use, and there's a bit of information that you have to pass to it. You have your app ID and action name, which you both set in the developer portal. The onSuccess callback function is what happens when that widget gets closed after that success state. Handle verify is an additional callback function that is optional. It's useful for doing cloud verification, where you can check against our API, see if that proof validates properly, and if it doesn't, you can throw an error to the user in a pretty way in the widget itself. But that one's optional and mostly won't be used for on-chain use cases. And then you have to also pass which credential types you want to accept. You can not define this, leave it out, and it will default to orb only. This is also a TypeScript example, so we have specific types for the different credential types. It's an array of these, or if you're using plain JavaScript, it will be an array of strings being either orb or phone. Then we have the child component, which is the button that we want to have users click in order to begin the verification process and open up that widget. And in that callback function, or those callback functions, I should say, both handle verify and on success, this is the response from IDKit that gets returned to that function when it's being called. So everything in here is kind of based on fancy math for the zero-knowledge proof system we use. The Merkle root is the root of the Merkle tree on-chain that essentially acts as the list of verified identities. This is where the public key of your world ID goes when you get verified in an orb or verify your phone number in the app. All it is a public key of that identity, and that public key is never revealed again because this zero-knowledge proof actually shows that you are one of the identities within this Merkle tree without revealing which one. This nullifier hash is the unique identifier of a user in the context of a specific app and action, right? We saw that we had to give the app ID and action name to the IDKit widget. So one app can have multiple actions. Say it's voting on multiple proposals, for example. Each proposal, you'd want to have a different action so that you can make sure each person gets to vote on each item once. So this nullifier hash, if the user performs the same action for the same app, it will always be the same. This is how we check to make sure a user's doing something only once. We check to see if we've seen this nullifier hash before. But if the user's performing a different action, then they'll have a completely different nullifier hash to prevent correlating different actions back to the same user. This is how we also keep it privacy preserving, because unless the user passes some additional information, like their wallet address or their Twitter handle, you can't tell that two actions were performed by the same person. This nullifier hash is also what acts as the unique identifier for a user in sign in with Worldcoin. This is that profile.sub that becomes the user ID. So every time a user signs into your app, they're performing the same action. So they'll have the same nullifier hash, which is how we know that it's that same user. This proof is a very long hexadecimal string that is what actually gets verified. We abstract away all of the actual math behind the zero-knowledge proof. All you have to do is pass this to one of the two methods we have for verifying these proofs, either using our API or on-chain. And lastly, you get this credential type. This will be either orb or phone, so that you can know which method this user was verified with. This is something you also have to pass when you're verifying this proof. Right, so you've received this proof, and sometimes what people try to do is just store that nullifier hash, but we do still have to verify this proof, right? Because that proof is essentially a claim that I'm a unique human performing this action only once. But we have to check and make sure that that claim is real. That proof gets returned to your app's front end from the user's mobile device. That proof is generated locally to avoid disclosing any information about who this user actually is. But it's just in your app's front end. Everything can be manipulated there by an end user. So for security, we have to verify that proof. The easier way to verify this proof is to pass the information from that proof to your app's backend. And then your backend would call our API. So the base URL here is developer.worldcoin.org/API/v1/verify/your app ID. This has to be the same app ID that you passed to the IDKit widget. The body of this includes the signal if one was passed, otherwise it's an empty string, includes the nullifier hash, the Merkle root, the action name, the proof itself, and the credential type. And all of that information gets passed to our API that does all the math to make sure that that Merkle root is a valid Merkle root, that all the math behind the zero-knowledge proof works out. And additionally, when using API verification, we check to make sure that this user hasn't performed this action before. In our developer portal, you get to set exactly how many times you want to let someone perform a specific action. Then the response from the from our API, if it's a status code 200, you know that this proof is verified, everything's good to go. And at that point, say you want to mark a user as verified in your database, you should do that in your backend, knowing that this user is verified here. And additionally, you can return a 200 response to your front end in order to let your front end know that everything checked out. Otherwise, if it's a 400 error, we include an error code that describes a little bit about what went wrong, whether it's that that user isn't actually verified, whether the user's performed this action before, things like that. And you should also pass that information back to your front end. For on-chain verification, this is where it gets a little bit more complex, but it's also the most flexible. So in your smart contract that you're writing for, let's just say, letting users claim an NFT and letting each real human claim this NFT once, right? In your constructor here, you would pass the world ID smart contract address. You can find this in our documentation. We have a tab called address book. And this will depend on which chain you're using, but you should use the world ID router contract. Additionally, you'll pass in the app ID and action ID. In this example, we're assuming there's only one action for a user to perform. You can pass the action ID in the function call, but if you're only having the users perform a single action, setting it in the constructor will help you save on gas. Also in the constructor, we calculate this external nullifier. This external nullifier is using the terminology from Semaphore, the zero-knowledge proof system that we're built on. It's essentially just the combination of your app ID and action ID that scopes uniqueness for this action. So if the external nullifier is the same, a user's nullifier hash will always be the same. But if that external nullifier changes, then your user's nullifier hash will change. This is just necessary for how we have to interact with the contracts on chain. And then in your function to verify that this user is unique and then execute whatever action you'd want to, it would look a little something like this. So you'd pass in the signal, which in this case we have as the user's wallet address. So you'd have to pass that as the signal into the ID kit widget before the proof is generated, and then additionally pass it as a call to your function here. This ensures that that bit of data isn't manipulated, right? You pass the root of the Merkle tree, the nullifier hash, and the proof. So these 3 bits of information are returned from IDKit at the end of the verification process. So we've also implemented Sybil resistance here. And the first thing we do is check if we've seen this nullifier hash before. If we've seen this nullifier hash, we know that this user's already performed this action. So if we've seen it before, we revert and the transaction doesn't go through. After we've checked to make sure we haven't seen this nullifier hash before, we call the verify proof function on the world ID router contract, which is what, again, does all of the fancy math to verify this proof and make sure that everything checks out. So we pass it the root, we pass it the group ID, and the group ID is based on which verification method your user has used. For on-chain, we generally recommend only allowing orb verified users, which would mean that your group ID should be 1. You can additionally set this in your constructor if you only want to allow orb verified users. If you want to allow phone verifications on chain, right now I don't think that you can actually test that. It won't work properly, but as a bit of information, the group ID for phone verifications is 0. You then have to ABI encode and hash the signal. Hash to field is a helper function that is again defined in our template repository for on-chain verification. It essentially just creates a KEKAK 256 hash of the signal here. You also have to pass the nullifier hash, the external nullifier that we computed in the constructor, and the proof. So once we've made that function call, if everything works out and this proof is valid, this will simply continue. It doesn't pass back any information or anything like that. It just proceeds. If there is an issue with verify proof, this will revert and the transaction won't complete. But if this does all check out and we continue on, the next thing we should do is set that we've seen this nullifier hash before, so that if the user tries to perform the action again, they won't be able to. Once we've done all of that, that's where you'd put in your code to issue that NFT, allow claiming that airdrop, anything like that. So that's a quick overview of how to integrate World ID into your project, whether it's a sign in with Worldcoin, anonymous actions with cloud verification, or anonymous actions with on-chain verification. We also have $3,000 worth of bounties available in this build-a-thon. Oh, I made a typo there. That is supposed to be $1,000 to the best overall project. That's the one we think makes the most effective use of World ID, and is generally the best use case, the best idea that uses World ID. $500 each to the best governance app. So that's one that will implement some sort of voting. That may be a DAO, that may be community proposals, anything related to governance there. $500 to the most creative use case. So this is one that we generally want people to have more fun with. One that I really enjoyed seeing in the past that won a most creative prize at a different hackathon was an on-chain dating app that used World ID to make sure that you were actually dealing with a real person and that profile wasn't a bot. $500 to the best AI use case. For us, knowing that a real human is on the other end is especially valuable in the age of AI. So this can be AI safety. This can be trying to make sure that an AI wasn't involved in generating some piece of content, or knowing that a human was truly involved in generating AI training data, things like that. And $500 to the best sign in with Worldcoin app. So that one, you have to use sign in with Worldcoin instead of anonymous actions. So that's all I have for my workshop here, and I'm definitely open to Q&A. You can always visit worldcoin.org/ethargentina23. If that link isn't live yet, it will be live very shortly, which has a Notion page with a lot of the information I've gone over here, links to our documentation, template repositories, everything like that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ian. So we do have questions. One is mine. My question is, I wanted to know if hackers can test all these functionalities that you showed without being verified by an orb. And then I have a comment on that. So yeah, I want to
Yes.
know. Yeah.
So you do not need to be verified at the orb in order to develop on World ID or test. You will need to use the World app to sign in to the developer portal, but you only need to be phone verified for that. After you're signed into the developer portal, if you create a staging app, you'll use the simulator at simulator.worldcoin.org for generating these proofs. And if you create a production app, you'll use the World app. But for the build-a-thon, generally we would recommend using staging applications and the simulator because it makes testing things a whole lot easier.
100%. Like you need something to get going fast. So that's awesome. Then we would like to know, can I use the Worldcoin verifier in a Web2 project? So, oh, that's
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah.
So for us, like we know that the technology we're building applies to a whole lot more than just Web3 and on-chain use cases, right? Sign in with WorldCoin is inherently pretty Web2. It's using the exact same technology that gets used for you to click the sign in with Google button on some web page, right? So sign in with WorldCoin as well as anonymous actions can both be used for completely Web2 use cases. And for anonymous actions, that's where you would use our API for verification off-chain.
That's awesome. And just so people know, I like one personal comment. I love that you showed a lot of tools that make testing and developing so much easier. Like I was impressed with all like the little details of the QR being able to copy and paste it on your testing app, the whole Vercel thing that it's easy to deploy and test things. So it's easy for builders to get going fast and implement all these like in a modular way. We can tell like it's easy to use, and yeah, I see the docs are very clean and easy to follow as well. I loved it. Um, so yeah, and the bounties also super fun. I love fun bounties. So they allow people to be creative, AI, all the new stuff. I want to ask you as well. Um, how do you think this whole Worldcoin thing affects governance? Like requesting like actual voters to go and vote and requesting a real ID for people.
So that's definitely one where we think there can be like a whole lot of innovation.
Hmm.
For voting in, government votes, right? They generally want to know that you're a citizen of their country and things like that, which we can't necessarily help with directly through World ID because we don't know which country you're a citizen or a resident of. But for governance in online communities and things like that, right? It can be super, super powerful for knowing that it's one person, one vote, rather than, lots of DAOs right now have one token, one vote mechanisms. And that can lead to whoever has the most money being able to drive the outcome they want. And if you try to do one person, one vote based on, oh, any wallet that holds this token um, gets one vote, then those really rich people just spin up a wallet and put one token in each wallet, and it doesn't actually solve that problem. So World ID is super, super useful for a lot of voting use cases, and it is something that we want to see more and more like creative implementations in lots of different contexts going forward.
It changes the dynamic completely. So it allows for like new use cases, new things. So that's awesome as well. Um, yeah, that's super cool. And also I was thinking for the builders especially, it's easy to add on your app. Don't just add it for the sake of adding verification, but I think we're it's a very hard problem to solve, and having all these endpoints and easy ways to adapt it to React, all these toolkits that you guys have prepared, and the easy way of development. It's easy to implement into any of your already built projects or the projects you are trying to build with the buildathon. So yeah, just integrating with React, creating an account, having the all the keys that you need and everything you showed us, and you're just getting verification on chain, and yeah, that's awesome. So I
I
don't know if you want to mention. Yeah, go. Yeah,
it's I recently did like rewrite the majority of our developer documentation to try and walk users
nice.
through it more, and have built out template repositories. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible for developers to build on World ID. But
Hmm.
I know that there's still going to be lots of questions. And I'll say that one of the best places to reach out if you do have questions, we have a channel in the Worldcoin Discord server. You can go to worldcoin.org/discord to be taken there. And then we have the SDK developers channel, which I monitor basically all the time that I'm awake. So if you have any
Nice.
questions about integrating World ID there, that'll be a great place for me to respond to you quickly and answer any questions you have.
100%. I don't know how you do it, but I see you everywhere answering questions, helping people with the build it on Super Hack everywhere. So I appreciate the help. And yeah, the whole documentation you think to the builders and to the people trying, go try it, break stuff, test the documentation. If you don't like something, raise the feedback, go back, tell them we want to see this, we want to see that, because I can tell that Ian here is working hard with the working team to make things easy for you to implement, to add these things and get some really cool features into your apps. And go check out the bounties as well and have fun. I want to see also the AI one. I really liked it, and the creativity one as well. I want to see creative apps as well. That would be super cool. We already have, I think, 42 teams registered for the
Wow.
buildathon. Yes,
Awesome.
yes, and we're going. yeah, and you're gonna be with us, right? Mentoring and walking around people.
Yes,
That's
so
yeah,
I'll be there in person for the build-a-thon as well to answer any questions there.
that's amazing. Okay, so everybody got the resources. We've seen how to implement well all the working things, the IDs and more with React as well. So that's very cool and new. We have new documentation. Go to worldcoin.org/ETHArgentina23 to the Notion with all the information. And yeah, happy hacking, I guess. So thank you very much, Ian, for being here. Thank you, Worldcoin, for sponsoring the Buildathon. And I want to tell builders, remember all these companies, all these sponsors, all these people working hard to give you all the opportunities to exploit the talent we have in LATAM that we're calling Tierra de Builders, which means the land of builders. We think, yeah, we have a lot of talent here. Personhood, like the proof of being a person here, you'll be able to be uh, builders in this. And yeah, it's going to be awesome. We're going to see very cool projects, I hope.
I'm very excited to see what people build.
Awesome, Ian. Thank you so much
All
for
right.
the support, and then see you next time.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye, everyone.